All right. So welcome everyone, both live and for those of you tuning into the recording. If I haven't met you before, my name is Ziggy, and I've been working at Fifth for a little while now, and this year taking a little bit more of an active role in terms of restoration, recovery, and all the things that can complement our life, our training, and I guess a little bit more of that sort of restful side of life, not just the pure active side. And today I'm doing a little bit of a workshop on sleep hygiene. So what essentially that is, why it's important, and the things and hopefully a few tips and tricks that we can have that will enable us to sleep better. And I kind of fundamentally believe that if we're not sleeping well, it's very hard for us to be well. I think especially new parents are good exponents of that. Talking to Sam a bit recently, I think it's been a big experience in his life. But yeah, I think really sleep is the bedrock of everything else we do in terms of our wellness routine, whether it's exercise or anything restorative. Sleep kind of it is the thing that everything else is built on. And so firstly, I guess I'm going to go a little bit more into what sleep hygiene specifically is, but first and foremost, why it's important. And really that sleep in our modern lives is much harder than it's ever been for us evolutionarily. That we have so much more stimulation, we have so many more screens and lights and all these sort of things that our nervous system and our neurology was fundamentally not designed to deal with. We also have the opportunity to stay up late, whether it's on our phones, watching TV. Our diet has changed, the rhythms of our life has changed. And so what sleep hygiene is essentially for me is actually having some boundaries around ourself and our behavior when it comes to the evening time and when it comes to night, that allows us to set ourselves up for the greatest amount of success that we can possibly have. We also have a lot more stress in our lives as well. Our lives are, I remember reading this in a study, which I'll have to find because I can't remember exactly how they quantified it, but it's basically the idea that we are 200 times more stressed than humans were at the turn of the 20th century. That because of what we're exposed to, because of everything from existential stress to the questions of, financial stress and the kind of the stimulation that we are sensorily inundated with, our nervous system is at a much more heightened state than really any of humanity has ever been before. And so we need to try, as I said before, set ourselves up for success and really create conducive inner environments and outer environments. And what I mean by that is our body and our nervous system and our minds. That's really our inner environment. And then what we can do in our house and our bedroom specifically to allow the best conditions for sleep to really occur. And I think there's a little bit of this idea that sleep should just happen. But unfortunately, in our modern lives, there's nothing really that works like that. Because everything is so different to our evolutionary biology these days, it needs a little bit more of a conscious effort and conscious thought around. And so I'll start, I guess, with the inner environment. So basically, as I said, your body and your mind. I know Sam has touched on some of these things in previous workshop, but one of the best things we can do for sleep is this sort of active recovery. And what I mean by that is taking specific time out of your day or out of your week that is allowing your nervous system and your mind and body a chance to recover. I mentioned this for everyone that was there at the Stress Less Challenge workshop that we launched on Saturday, that just sitting in front of the TV isn't necessary as a way of relaxing, isn't actually reducing any stress from your nervous system. It isn't releasing any. You're not gaining any and you're not increasing the amount of stress, but you're not doing anything to release. And so we think about that from a hormonal perspective. Cortisol, which is our main stress hormone and is something that for those of us that live very active, busy, engaged lives, is probably overproduced in our bodies. Beginning to think of ways and find ways that we can reduce cortisol is a really, really fantastic way to begin to improve our sleep. The easiest way to do that for all of us at Fifth Element and the most effective way is through using the infrared sauna. As we use the infrared sauna, what our body does is actually begin to detox. Our body is very, very intelligent. And the first thing it detoxes is the things that it recognizes as toxins. And so for anyone that's ever used it, maybe after they're a little bit hungover or had a big weekend, maybe you notice that the actual smell of your sweat is a little bit different because there are more toxins in the body if you spend, a few nights drinking or a few nights partying or something like that. And the first thing our body recognizes from a stress perspective is cortisol. And so when we use the infrared sauna, the body goes, okay, what is the first thing I want to get rid of? Generally speaking, in terms of toxicity, that's going to be cortisol. So having infrared saunas has a very real physiological effect on helping your body prepare to sleep. Another one, which isn't my area of expertise, there's plenty of people at Fifth that know a lot more about this, but is also increasing when we're having our dinner, being conscious of actually having carbohydrates for dinner. Carbohydrates also help absorb cortisol. And so there's something that's really helpful there in preparing the body for sleep. One little caveat with that is that trying your best not to have your dinner too late. Sometimes that's unavoidable. I played soccer my whole life, and I'd often get home from training at 9:30, 10 o'clock and have to have a late dinner. It's actually quite hard, even though your rest and digest response are the same thing. The need for your body to digest your food will actually prolong its ability to fall asleep. For those of you that ever had a massive meal and then try to go to sleep, it's actually quite uncomfortable to do because your body's in the process of digesting. And so having a slightly earlier dinner will also support with that. Another one in terms of our food consumption is being conscious of when we're having sugar before bed. And so if we're, having half a block of chocolate at 8 p.m., 7:30 p.m., not quite as detrimental as if you're having that at 10, 10:30, 11. Because again, sugar is a stimulant. And so if we're having sugary things quite late at night, which is quite common for us because we like to close off, I know at least I do, you close off your meal with a little taste of sugar. Doing that a little bit earlier will also make a difference in terms of your ability to go to sleep. The other one is being conscious of what exercise you're doing and when. Now, a lot of us have to be able to have to be able to get our exercise in when we can. And we don't necessarily have the ability to choose I can do my cardio in the morning and my strength training in the evening and afternoon. But if you do have the ability to do that, the higher intensity things you do later on is going to stimulate your nervous system to the point that it actually can affect sleep as well. And so cardio and that more high intensity training in the morning actually will set you up so by the time you get to bed, you're a little bit more fatigued. Strength training in the afternoon or evening doesn't quite stimulate the nervous system in the same sort of way. And then when we get to bed, we get more chance to recover and sleep and recover, I guess, from the muscle tears and the work that we're doing through weightlifting and in the gym. Exercise is a good one to think about as well, because for those of you that have done this and have had periods of training, and maybe you're in one now where you're training quite a lot, it's quite simply easier to go to sleep. Evolutionarily, our body likes to be used. And so actually the more exercise we do, the easier it is to fall asleep. Again, we're conscious of the time we're doing it and the style of exercise we're doing when we can. But the more we use our body, the more sleep we're actually going to need. And so exercising consistently, I should say, is a really great way of impacting and helping ourselves sleep. Coffee is another one in terms of something that we ingest. I love coffee as much as anyone. I try to have a very strict rule with myself, something I actually learned through Fifth, that I'll have one a day and I'll have it between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. That means that I'm not using it to wake up in the morning, and my body isn't getting used to that, to the caffeine and the sort of chemical reaction of what's happening to wake me up. And at the same time, I'm giving my body enough time to actually begin to reduce and release the caffeine. So if we're having a coffee at, say, 8 in the morning and another one at 2, because we have a bit of a slump at 2 or 3 p.m., by the time we're trying to go to sleep, there's actually still caffeine in our bodies. And the chemical effect is still there affecting our nervous system. And so what is actually happening is every single day, you're actually just topping it up. And there's no point throughout your day that your body is completely empty of caffeine. Whereas if you can restrict yourself to one between 9 and 11 a.m., by the time your sleep rolls around, you've released the majority of the caffeine. By the time you wake up the next day, it's all out of your system. And so you're giving your body this sort of chance to return to homeostasis without this continual top up of caffeine and epinephrine. I'm really bad at saying that word. There's other things we can do to really support ourselves sleep. The hardest thing that I observe when I work with people, and that is quite common now in our modern lives, and I mentioned this again at the stress workshop that we ran on Saturday, is that because our lives are so stressful, we are never necessarily releasing all of that stress from our nervous system. And so if you think of stress and fatigue as the two things that our nervous system is always trying to, I guess, release in order to get back to a homeostatic state, when we are really stressed, every time we sleep, our body doesn't get a chance to reduce the level of fatigue in our nervous system. So stress might sit on the top 80%, fatigue on the bottom 20%. And so when you sleep, you might really reduce about 20% of your stress levels. What happens the next day? Busy work day, life is hard, things are challenging. You go back to 100%. Body goes back to sleep. You go back to sleep, body releases that top layer of stress. And that might be for anyone that's experienced this, why you might sleep 7, 8, 9 hours and not actually feel very rested, because the layers of fatigue are not being released from your nervous system. And so the best thing we can do is use active recovery as a way of mitigating and releasing stress as we're going through this process. So things like sauna, things like meditating, things like stretching, even like more gentle movement, sort of zone 2 movement in terms of like yoga and mat Pilates, things that aren't super high heart rate. Even going for a walk, all of those are things that we can use to release stress. And so that by the time we get to sleep, we are down at maybe 30, 40, 50%. And so the release that begins to happen is actually reducing the layers of fatigue in our body as well. And so when I think about sleep in our modern lives, the best way you can support your sleep in many ways is actually what you're doing when you're awake. And so, for example, taking 5 or 10 minutes to meditate each morning is having a really, really compounding effect on your nervous system that allows that stress to be released. And we have, I've got, I think, 10 or 12 meditations on the Fifth app, in the Trainerize app, which you can use at any point. It's in the workout section down the bottom. And doing something like that is giving your nervous system the chance to reset and to not only release stress, but begin to release fatigue when you sleep. There are lots of, and this again isn't my area of expertise. There's many more people at Fifth that know more about this, but products like magnesium can be super supportive. I know there are other ones that if you speak to the guys at the front desk or send an email in, that there are certain supplements you can take that are supportive of sleep that are actually enhancing your ability to sleep opposed to creating sleep, like a lot of medical ones might do. Yeah. In terms of our inner world, those are kind of the main things I think that are really important. In terms of our outer environment, so basically how we want to set up our rooms, our homes to be supportive for sleep. There are lots of ways you can go about this. And I think it's the boundaries that we need and really small, simple steps that we stick to that will make a really, really big difference. So for example, if you find yourself on your computer answering emails late at night while you're in bed, if you find yourself not being able to sleep so that you reach over to your phone and start scrolling through TikTok or Pinterest or Instagram or whatever it might be, the best thing you can do in that circumstance is to remove the temptation of your phone. And so I have a blanket rule with people that I say that is the best way to support yourself asleep. Take your phone out of your bedroom. Do not allow your phone in your bedroom, because you remove the temptation to be able to do that. And as I said on Saturday, for those of you that say my phone is my alarm clock, on Amazon, they cost $5, and I would just buy an alarm clock and use that instead of having your phone next to you, where there is that temptation to do it. In probably another workshop, I can talk a little bit about the effects it also has on your sleep. The first thing you do is reach over for your phone. If you're reaching over for your phone and scrolling on Instagram or the news or whatever it might be as your way of waking up, that also has a very detrimental effect to our nervous system, but don't really have the time to go through that in depth today. So the first thing is, don't have screens in your room, TV, computers, phones. Take away the temptation of those things, because neurologically and on a neurological level, they have a really, really adverse effect on sleep. A continuation of that would be to then have not use any screens after 9:30 p.m. Because the more we're using our screens, the later in our day and in our evenings, the more stimulated we're becoming. Even if you have one of those special blue light things that is reducing blue light or whatever it is, that is making a 5% difference when it comes to our neurology. The stimulation of these things is such that no matter what mitigating tech we might use, it is still having that very stimulating effect on our nervous systems. We're also very conditioned to be attentive to these things. We're really conditioned that as soon as your phone buzzes, you pick it up. And so your body is never actually allowed to get to a place where it's going into a deep sort of deep state in preparation for rest, because you're always waiting for the next thing to hold and the next thing to grab onto. And so creating the conditions for these things to not be as stimulating is a massive one. Of course, there are some days where you might have certain work things or requirements that you're going to have to do emails till 9:30, 10 p.m. That's understandable. But when that becomes the norm opposed to the exception, that's going to be really impacting our ability and our conditions for sleep. Lighting is also another one. Being conscious of your lighting as you're winding down towards bed. And so if you're sitting in a room like I am right now at 9:30 p.m. with all of the lights really, really bright, that's also not necessarily very good for us to be winding down. So even if you are watching TV till, 9:29 and no later, then one of the things of having small lamps around and the main lights turned off is actually another way to begin to prepare your body that we're winding down, because all the circadian rhythms and the natural intelligence recognizes that when things are bright, I need to be awake. Because basically when we were, for the 200,000 years of humanity, basically, we were, sun is up, I need to be awake, sun is down, I'm going to sleep. Now we don't have that same ability and we don't have those same rhythms. And so we need to actually create them in our homes and in our lives. The other thing that I have in my room, for example, instead of having really bright lamps, I have salt lamps. They don't have quite as intense, I guess, electro fields, which are still things that we pick up on. It's why a lot of the time when, for example, if you go camping, you might have like a really deep sleep because you're not around a lot of those electromagnetic magnetic fields. So things like salt lamps or really soft lighting means that you're creating your sleeping space as a place for sleeping. And in addition to that would be trying to avoid, and it's hard sometimes, especially if we're sharing houses with roommates and that sort of thing, trying to avoid doing work in our bedrooms. So your room is really the place for you to wind down and to sleep. It isn't, again, if you're in a share house situation, that's a little bit harder. But if you can have the boundaries that your room is where you sleep, opposed to where you maybe do your work in or sit up in bed, that also makes a bit of an effect from a habitual pattern behavior perspective. The other thing in terms of supporting sleep as kind of my last point today would be on the app. There's a meditation there called, I think, Meditation for Sleep, or even just sleep meditation. That's specifically designed to help you sleep. Now, you might need your phone in your bedroom if you're going to be listening to that to go to sleep, but maybe you turn the phone to airplane mode and turn off any form of notifications or whatever it is. But that meditation is specifically designed to help you sleep. So it will take you through a breathing process and through a few counts and a few other things that you go through. It's about 15 minutes. And the idea is that by the time that finishes, it's actually taking you to sleep, because the breathing you're doing is actually beginning to move your nervous system to a really restful state where you're going to be able to sleep as well. And so those are like, there's a lot of points in there as to how we can do these things. If I was going to give you some main takeaways, I guess, of all the things I just listed, from an outer perspective, set your room up as like a sacred sleeping space. Don't have it as a place that you are doing all of your things are, recognizing it, especially your bed, even in particular in your room, have that as the place that you sleep. Have low lighting, try and avoid having the phone in there, try and not be on your screens in there. It makes a really, really big difference from a neurologically patterned behavioral perspective. In terms of all the things we can do, I would say the most beneficial one we can do is doing activities while we're awake. They're going to reduce stress. The less stress we have in our nervous system, the easier it is to sleep. The more heightened, the more stressed we are, the more likely the mind is to be running, especially if the only time we're going to be still is when we're going to bed. And so things like meditation, things like being in the sauna are cultivating the ability to be still, but actually giving your nervous system a chance to release and reduce stress. And if we think of stress as essentially inflammation of the nervous system, anything we can do to de-inflame the nervous system is going to be supportive to our sleep. And so that would be kind of the two main things. If you're taking anything away from that, active recovery when you're awake, when you're going to sleep, have your physical space set up for sleep. Yeah. And I'm sure I'll do some more of these in the future where we can go a little bit more depth around some of these specific things, but that's kind of the overall introduction to sleep hygiene. Which, yeah, I guess, was there anyone that is here that actually has any questions that I can answer in in real time in case any of you do? We're going to ask one, Reed, because I think you're muted. Yeah.
Yeah, I just have a question for you. So I'll go to bed and my brain is just going like I'm thinking about who I've got to email, what memberships I've got to do, like it's I cannot turn it off. Do you have any like tips or anything to help with that? Because it's just like
Yeah,
crazy.
totally. Yes, one would be having the reason I am such an exponent, I guess, of meditation is because what it's doing is cultivating the ability to be still where we can actually begin to observe the mind moving without getting overly involved. And so one of the things that happens when we go to sleep is it's like I said before, the first time that we're still and everything's just going, 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 going. One of the ways that we can get better with that, and one of the ways that we can allow that to improve, is by cultivating stillness in other parts of our life. The other thing, if you want something a little more immediate, would be to use that sleep meditation. Because when I'm guiding you through the practice, it's a lot of these sort of like counts on the breath and everything. The mind essentially, and this is my yoga background talking more than anything, the mind always wants something to do and always wants something to focus on. And so when we use a practice like the sleep meditation one, it actually absorbs the movement of the mind in a way that allows it to actually be quiet. And it kind of bypasses, it uses our breath to access our nervous system in a way that bypasses thought and mental activity and naturally allows it to decompress. But the thing that will be, that's kind of like a quick fix, I guess, that will help, could help tonight, for example, over the next, months, years, having something that we're doing on a regular basis that is detoxing our mind of stress and our nervous system of stress is going to be the most effective thing. And so one is kind of like a bit of a quick fix, but then that will become a crux and we don't want that to necessarily happen. Doing that sort of, I really do believe that everyone can meditate for 5 or 10 minutes a day. And over time, that becomes easier and that begins to positively impact by the time we're going to sleep. Does that make sense? Is that helpful?
It does.
Yeah.
No, definitely. I'm going to try it tonight.
Cool. Awesome. Myth, you have your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not really obliging to the no stress thing because I'm at work trying to simultaneously
Fair
listen.
enough.
But I suppose question for you might be able to relate to it in like soccer's a bit like doing a HIIT activity. For me, I do Muay Thai in the evenings, and
Yeah.
especially on days like today, we'll finish up around sort of 8:30, and even after I've had a shower, I have this sense that my sort of it just feel my body is like inflamed, and because of that, I just find it so hard to kind of get to sleep, even with the aircon on and like no blankets or anything like that. Is there anything like or that to sort of calm that sort of perhaps adrenaline like state down?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, I haven't found it, to be honest. I would have I often play at night. I like play games at night and you get home at 11 p.m. and I'm just lying in bed till like 2:30 just because there is so much adrenaline in your system, right? Like that's what happens when you're doing a physical and like, I guess, a combative thing that your body floods you with that. So you're going to be more effective in it. One thing that can help is like getting home and stretching for like 15 or 20 minutes because doing that and doing like longer hold stretching and more restorative movement begins to shift the state of your nervous system. Now, it might make the difference of like half an hour. It's not going to be like, oh, now I can just go to sleep, but it will make a little bit of a difference from a nervous system perspective and beginning to wind you down.
Cool. Thank you.
No worries. Vince?
Oh, sorry, I was just going to, I don't really have huge trouble going to sleep, but I was just had a suggestion for Ree because what I do is I actually have a notepad and a pencil next to my desk. And if you ever have something that it's like, oh, I need to remember this thing for tomorrow, I need to do this thing tomorrow, you just kind of write it down and then it kind of stimulates you to not have to think about it so much. I have found that to be good also for my kids as well. They don't fall asleep like I do. But yeah, just like a pen and paper next to you, and it's like, oh, I need to remember this for tomorrow, instead of having to think about it for the next 3 hours or till the next morning. It's written down, and when you wake up, you've got it written down. That's one thing that's kind of off your mind, I guess.
Yeah, it's a really good idea. It's a really good tip. Well, guys, I guess we'll leave it there. As I always say, like, you message me through the Trainerize app. You can find me on Instagram. I think my email's in some of the stuff as well. So like, always happy to have a chat if you have any further questions or you want any more tips and tricks or anything like that. And yeah, hope you all have a wonderful day, great sleep tonight. And hopefully see you around the studio, around the gym in the next week or so.